Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I am going to quickly mute everyone. Oh, and the magic of Zoom is it no longer mutes me. Our panelists will have to unmute when they're ready. But welcome to Sinister Wisdom's Matchmaking in the Archive event. I am thrilled to have you here this evening. My name is Julie Enzer, and this is the book that we're talking about, Matchmaking in the Archives, edited by E.G. Crichton. And we have 3 other contributors to the book who are joining us in conversation this evening. I encourage you to sit back and relax. We're going to have an incredible conversation about this book, about archives, about lesbians, about identity, about all the good things that many of us at Sinister Wisdom really love. When Max, who's on tap this evening to help with technology stuff and support this event, heard about this book, Max said right away, I'm going to go out and buy it. And when I got the book from the publisher, I knew I wanted to do something with our community because, as I say, it's about all of the things that I think really align so well with the many different projects that Sinister Wisdom is doing. So I'm so pleased you're here this evening, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before we begin, it is our custom to spend a moment on a land acknowledgement, and for the past month and a week or so, we also spend a moment reflecting on the war in the Middle East. There are many layers of conflict in Israel and Palestine, and I know at this time many of us are mourning the loss of life, the continued occupation of the Palestinian people by Israel, and ongoing war and conflict. As we pause for our land acknowledgement, I also want us to ask us in the Sinister Wisdom community to raise up our voices for peace during this painful and difficult time. Here in the United States and around the world, many of us live on occupied, unceded land. I am in what is now Dover, Florida, traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole. You are invited to insert into the chat your location and acknowledge the land on which you live as we pause to recognize the histories of war and colonization, and to imagine and work for a world where we have a more fair and equitable distribution of resources, and a world in which we can find ways to honor one another and live together in peace. Before we get started with our formal program this evening, I'll tell you a little bit about Sinister Wisdom. I know many of you are longtime supporters of the journal, but I like the opportunity to highlight our wonderful fall issue, Sinister Wisdom 130. We teach sex to everyone. And Max just deleted part of my script here, so I'm going off script. This is the beautiful cover art that we have. And it also features a photograph on the back. This issue is in the mail. All subscribers should have it. If you do not and you are a subscriber, email me and let me know. We'll get a replacement out to you as soon as possible. The issue also mailed with our fantastic lesbian badge. And I know some folks have not received that because I've been mailing out a few extras. I don't know if they fell out in the mail or if we had a little challenge at our mail house. But here's the lesbian badge, celebrating radical creativity in 2023. If you did not receive it with your subscription copy, let me know. If you want to purchase extras to share with people, we always welcome that. That's at sinisterwisdom.org/badge. And then finally, our 2024 calendar, which we are starting to run low on, about 6 weeks left in this year before you need your next calendar. This one takes from the same title as the badge, Radical Creativity. It features artwork by 12 queer and lesbian artists, all amazing. We had a great event on it. You can see in the archive. If you've not ordered the calendar, I invite you to do so at sinisterwisdom.org/calendar. As many of you know, Sinister Wisdom is supported entirely by our community. through subscriptions, donations, and other ways that people come and help and show up for Sinister Wisdom. If you are not currently a subscriber, I encourage you to subscribe today at sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. And a group of monthly sustainers are vital to our work. If you can give monthly to Sinister Wisdom, I invite you to sign up as a sustainer at sinisterwisdom.org/sustainers. We send out an email each month when your gift comes in with behind the scenes details and new information about what we have coming for the journal, which, as you know, is a lot these days. Before the end of the month, all subscribers will have our very special bonus Sapphic Classic, which is right here at the edge of my desk, Judy Grann's The Highest Apple, Sappho and the Poetic Tradition. We're so thrilled to bring this book back into print of Judy Grann's. And it's going out to all subscribers by the end of the month in a beautiful new edition. And in 2 weeks, Judy will be with us at an event similar to this, reading, talking about the book with the other contributors to the book. So I invite you to join us for that. So that is my advertisement for Sinister Wisdom. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. I've muted everyone. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the program. We will mute you if we hear noise from your phone. And I'll mute myself if my delightful dog who's joining me this evening starts to make noise. As the program proceeds, if you want to show appreciation for readers, feel free to wave your hands at the end of each reading or discussion by the writer and artist joining us. You can also use reaction emojis on Zoom. You're welcome to light up the chat as we go along, particularly raising up and echoing things that you agree with. You may also ask questions throughout the program, and we will raise those up to our speakers. If you need technical assistance, chat with Max on tap for technical assistance. And as always, we are recording this event and we'll make it available starting tomorrow or Thursday at sinisterwisdom.org/SW130. That's the current issue of the journal, sinisterwisdom.org/SW130. So without further delay, I'm so excited for our program, so we'll begin. We're going to have great conversations about this wonderful book, Matchmaking in the Archive. And we described this event with 2 questions. How do lesbians and queer women use archives? And what insights and treasures do archives offer lesbians who are not historians? So those sort of form 2 of the many questions that I have in my mind to talk about this evening with E.G. Crichton and the other contributors to this book. But we're going to begin by bringing E.G. onto our virtual stage here. E.G. is an interdisciplinary artist and teacher. E.G. explored these questions about archives through an artist's residency at the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. Then she paired artists with archives held by the Historical Society and curated an exhibition of that work in response to archives at the GLBT Historical Society. And then she built the book documenting the project, Matchmaking in the Archive. So E.G., welcome. Thank you for all of that incredible work, which has, I know you've been working on this project for a very long time. I'm thrilled to have you here talking with the Sinister Wisdom community, not only because the book talks about things that we're interested in, but Sinister Wisdom makes a beautiful, a couple lovely appearances within the book, which we may talk about a little bit this evening. But will you start by telling us a little bit how you came to this project?
Gladly. Hi, everybody, and thank you, Julie, so much. There's two projects. There's the original project, and then there's the book. And the project started in 2008 at a time when I had grown, as an artist, had grown really tired of the art world. And so I welcomed and got really excited about this opportunity to become an artist in residence for an organization that felt a little closer to home. And that was the GLBT Historical Society. I was pretty much always an archive nerd, but now I had the insider opportunity to freely wander the aisles of an organization that devoted to the preservation of queer history. The archives that I found represented all kinds of things, organizations, events, famous people like Harvey Milk. But when I started to wander the aisles and tune into other archives that represented people I'd never heard of, I realized that these were the ones that really called out to me. These were kind of the more modest folders and boxes that contain artifacts and papers from ordinary individuals who are no longer living. And I found myself really appreciating that the organization collected those. While we talk, I am going to share the screen to share images from the original project, which was called Lineage, Matchmaking in the Archive, and slides that also represent images in the book. And these will include some of the archive boxes that really attracted me, as well as a few of the portraits that I made that show living participants with their archive matches, including the people on this panel. So I'm going to start the slides now. This is a little close-up of the book. And okay, Julie. Next question.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna insert a question. Was archival work always a part of your art making practice prior to starting this body of work, or was this a new direction for you as an artist?
It was both new and old. Before I started this project, my art was always sort of cross-media and interdisciplinary, and it was already rooted in explorations of different sorts of archives, which I defined pretty broadly and pretty queerly. For example, graveyards, I found to be an incredible archive, and so I did a whole series of projects based on graveyards and epitaphs. Historical texts about sexuality and perversion always intrigued me. I would collect old books from flea markets and scan the internet. And then another example is girl culture, what I call girl culture, clapping chants and jump rope rhymes. But in this new context of working within the Historical Society, my attention really turned to the physical presence of a person manifested through their artifacts. And usually these are sorted either by them while they're living or by another person, and then donated to the organization. So just as with epitaphs, the contents of the boxes always raised questions for me and suggested incomplete narratives. I thought, what if I matched a living individual to an archived person and fostered a kind of generative relationship? I was drawn to the idea of forging my own relationships to the dead and then opening up each relationship in a kind of three-way connection with the person that I matched. So matchmaking in this context held promise as a way to more deeply explore these archives of the dead and to open up their lives to the imagination of living participants.
So as a curator, you were both exploring the archives at the GLBT Historical Society, and then also knowing the artists that you were engaging in the project and bringing them together for these conversations. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, at first I had no idea who was going to participate. I think I became a little overwhelmed. There were so many archives I was interested in, and I think I realized that if I opened this up to participation, I would get to engage with more of them. And I also wanted to do a kind of activist thing with the organization. I wanted to bring new people into the archive and new kinds of archives. So that was my other motivation. I mean, the idea kind of evolved over a summer of intense archive work. I mean, I just spent hours and hours in this archive. And once I landed on this notion of matchmaking, I started with people I knew, and then I thought, I can't just do people I know. So I started to really network and reach out. And in some cases, people came to me and asked. But my open-ended request of people was that each person create a response to the archive match in the medium of their choice. And each resulting encounter kind of resembled a blind date. I thought about chemistry, I thought about demographics, mutual interests. I created guidelines that I later bent, like that the collections I selected should not be well known and matches should be between strangers of different generations. Ultimately, I used intuition to pair creative individuals with an unfamiliar archive that might turn them on. And the intense right relationships that formed in this process evolved into a form of lineage. And I liked the fact that this was a lineage that resides outside of bloodlines and outside of the marriage contracts, and often outside of identity boundaries as well. And I was really pleasantly surprised that almost everybody I approached responded with enthusiasm. I established protocols for my process of engaging people. I made formal introductions, invited them to the archives, brought out their particular box or boxes, and also made it clear to them that they had no obligation to like the person I matched them to or to commemorate that person's life. You know, I said that's already been done. And I just wanted to allow the unexpected to unfold in a process of invention that would be different for each participant. So the project, Lineage Matchmaking in the Archive, was really an invitation to wander through one archive and to connect with one person for whom selected artifacts had been preserved in boxes and folders. And the participants who accepted this invitation became creative agents who were really free to interpret a life or invent a response that ended up being exhibited, performed, read, listened to, and watched by audiences who mostly didn't know the archived person. So I decided early on not to be a control freak and to control very tightly the process of matchmaking, but to not control the process of invention that people did. In many cases, what became apparent when people started exploring their archives were the gaps in the archive, what was missing. You know, no archive was really a complete narrative. And people, including me, started to tune into what is missing or never recorded, all the details of lives and histories that never make it into an archive box. And I think that's where the role of artists comes in. Like I'm not a journalist, I'm not an archivist. You know, I feel like I have a kind of freedom as an artist to imagine beyond the actual tangible confines of what we find in an archive. And, you know, I feel pretty passionate about the fact that so much of history is lost. You know, so many details of lives and actions and feelings are missing. And, you know, we search for a coherent narrative, but what we find are kind of fractured hints. I think it's crucial for people, whether they call themselves artists or not, to be able to imagine and feel the past and to find ways to flesh out the traces that we are able to find. So the work of participants, the relationship between an archived person and a living person, in a way gives that archive a body. You know, each box and each folder is filled with the possibility of touch. There's a lot of objects in these archives, smell, sight, sound, what I call the metaphorical taste of one person's life. And I forgot to advance my slides and all that, but I will do that now.
No, go back to the second one, because I just want to clarify. So this is like this shows some of the archival holdings of the GLBT Historical Society. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that this is a community-based archive that is supported, like Sinister Wisdom, by the primarily the local gay and lesbian community in San Francisco. And it's also open to everyone, so that any individual in the community can go in, ask to see different archival things. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to be a university faculty person. You don't have to be a trained historian. It's like, that's one of the principles of our community archives, is that they're accessible to people. And I think this is one of the really exciting things of your project, is it shows us what we can do with these holdings, in addition to being interested in what lives were like in the past. So I wanted to highlight that a bit.
Yeah, and they had never had an artist in residence, and I felt like it was really up to me to sort of expand the organization's notion of what an artist could do. You know, I think people thought at first they didn't know what residence meant. You know, they didn't know if I was going to like sleep on a cot there. Although I have to say, I was given key, you know, security was very lax back then. And so I got keys. I could go anytime I wanted. I finally said to them, you know, you guys need better security. But I really loved having that access. And I think the organization really loved the fact that what I did bring other people into the archive, that it wasn't, you know, it wasn't me creating a painting of a particular archive. It was broader than that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Go ahead and tell us more from the slides you have.
Some of the participants here, including TT.
I see TT, yeah. We'll hear from shortly.
And then these are just, I took all these photos of the open boxes because I just found them beautiful and fascinating. So that's what I'm showing here. And some of these boxes represent archives that I worked with. And then at some point I started doing formal portraits that in which the living person and the archived person occupied the frame at the same time. And it was a performative gesture that maybe took a couple of hours, and you know, each person would like start to interact with their archive person, and I just took photos. So that's what you're seeing in the rest of these slides are some of the participants in the project.
Wow. And one of the things I wanted just to ask you to reflect on a little bit that I also found so compelling from this book, you talk about how the project itself stages these kind of intergenerational dialogues between the person whose object is in, who has some objects in the archives and is passed away, and then a living person. And also, I think within the book, you have multiple generations engaging with these archives from the queer past. Can you talk a little bit about that intergenerational work and any observations you have from doing that with this large group of people?
Yeah, that was really important to me. And you know, when I saw that question from you, I realized that it was also intergenerational within me in my life, because I started this project when I was middle-aged. And by the time I was writing the book during the pandemic, you know, I'm in my senior years. There was sort of an internal and intergenerational knowledge transfer for me. But I've created several projects now that are focused on queer public archives, and in all of them, I've used matchmaking as a means of involving people of different generations. You know, I've been a teacher. I'm a retired art professor, and I think, especially as I've grown older, relating to and learning from younger people has held a really important place in my life. And part of this is curiosity about difference. You know, what will I learn from a participant in their 20s or 30s? And some of it is my own desire to stay relevant, to be noticed, to be remembered. somewhat to my surprise, younger people have responded really enthusiastically to these matchmaking archive projects. And just recently, just this past week, a young lesbian author from Brooklyn who had discovered my book and the associated exhibit last summer when visiting the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. She is now engaged with starting a matchmaking project with the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn. And I am thrilled to serve as a consultant. I always felt like this was an idea that should spread.
Yes.
The participants in the Lineage project spanned 3 generations, I would say. Regardless of age, the evolution of the accumulated work transformed us in ways that we never, I'd say most people never anticipated. It's spending time with the archives as somebody who has died, and sometimes they died at an age that is younger than we are, is really intense and it's intimate. There's a sadness that occurs. But viewing somebody else's artifacts also makes us think about our own finite lives. And mixed in, I think there's an eroticism in touching the artifacts of a life, of entering a narrative that feels private. Would this person have been comfortable with this exploration of their life? Would they be insulted or would they be offended? Was I prying too much? And I asked these questions all summer in 2008 as I wandered through the archives, and found myself wanting to know how participants would navigate these thorny issues. What would come out of the relationships I was fostering? And I was really eager to discover what would emerge from the recesses of the vault, and I wanted to be surprised. So I'm, if it's all right with you, Julie, I'm going to move on and introduce the 3 panelists.
Fantastic.
And I'll show slides that relate to them as well. So Camille Norton, who you see here with her match, Nancy Stockwell, her most recent book of poetry is called A Folio for the Dark. Her previous book, Corruption, won the National Poetry Series Award. Camille is a professor of English at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. And Camille was part of the first cohort of 11 participants in the Lineage project. Chris Vargas is a video maker and interdisciplinary artist, a recipient of a Creative Capital Award and a Guggenheim Fellowship. He collaborated with Greg Humans on the web-based sitcom Falling in Love with Chris and Greg. And with Eric Stanley, Vargas co-directed the movie Homotopia and its feature-length sequel, Criminal Queers. Vargas is executive director of the Museum of Transgender Herstory and Art, known as MATHA. And MATHA has produced a book that is upcoming, I just ordered it, called Trans Herstory in 99 Objects. Chris played a little bit of a different role in this project. He was one of 3 brand new matches that I made when I was writing the book. And in the title, where I talk about 3 encounters with ghosts, I'm referencing his essay as one of those in the title. T.T. Takamoto is an artist and filmmaker who explores hidden dimensions of same-sex intimacy in Asian American history. Takamoto was awarded Grand Jury Prize for Best Experimental Film at Slamdance and Best Experimental Film Jury Award at All Genders, Lifestyles, and Identities Film Festival. They are Dean of Humanities and Sciences at California College of the Arts. And like Camille, TT was part of my first cohort of participants. So I'm going to reverse the order and start with you, TT.
Great, thank you so much. So it was amazing to be part of EG's project. When EG told me that she was setting me up with a blind date with a dandy gay bachelor from San Francisco, Japanese American. I was intrigued, and maybe a little bit nervous. But as I started looking through his materials, his box was quite small. So, e.g., if you just go back to the last one for a second. So, just to give you a sense, most people had a whole file box, and this is known as kind of like a half file box or a third of a box. And then you move forward. And it had, some official documents, and also a couple photo albums, and some gay ephemera. So the ephemera part was, a very delicious part of the archive. So you are seeing a postcard of a matador with an erect penis necktie clip so that you can remove the penis, wear it on your necktie, go out for the evening, and then come back and put it back on your matador. So to me, this sort of indicated a kind of gay, queer sensibility, definitely a sense of humor. And then the other thing that really struck me about a couple of the photographs is that they were taken during the time that he was incarcerated by the US government during World War II. So in the background, you're just able to see a guard tower in the distance behind the person in the middle, who was actually probably Jiro Onumura's boyfriend lover, as well as barbed wire. Next, please. And then there was also this group photo of Jiro Onuma. He's sitting in the bottom right, in the first row. And this is a portrait of him with other people who worked in the mess hall in the prison camp. And so this also sort of captured my imagination in terms of just thinking about a gay man who was 38 years old when he was incarcerated. His other photographs suggest that he had a pretty vibrant gay life in San Francisco before incarceration in Utah. Then he comes into the camp experience. He's in a non-gender segregated prison situation, and he is, having to interact with other folks who may or may not know about his gayness. And I was just imagining his life in terms of a kind of loneliness and longing. Next. So I originally started thinking about what's called the art of gaman. And the art of gaman is the art of making objects in the incarceration camps out of found objects. So if you go to the next one. And oftentimes they use materials like tar paper or other found materials. Folks often painted or on the tar paper or burned them. So I recreated some of the photographs from his archive onto tar paper. And I also think of this as his sort of shadow archive or ghost archive. Next. It was common for Japanese Americans to make handmade playing cards. There is a game that's known as Hanafuda, which means flower card game. And a typical set would have different types of flowers, and then each series would also have an animal. So I made a homemade set for Jiro, but instead of the animals, I replaced them with muscle men. So you can see little muscle men in some of them. And then the other thing that was common was in all of the camps, they had art making classes where they carved small wooden birds out of scraps of wood. And this has an interesting connection to the beginning of the Audubon Society, and in National Geographic, they showed these pages of identifying birds of North America. And so these pages were used as models for these art classes. And so many Japanese American families, including my own, will have, like a grandmother who kept a bird pin, but maybe never talked about where it came from. So I remember my grandmother's bird pins. And then I thought, well, if Jiro was in this class, he wouldn't have made a brooch or a pin. He would have made cufflinks. So I made a set of wooden cufflinks. I taught myself how to make these bird pins. And I think of them as gay birds. And then the other exciting thing about his archive is that he was obsessed with this muscle man named Earl Lederman, who had a physical culture school where you can get muscular within 12 weeks if you use his signature muscle device. And so next, if you go to the next one, it's probably a little clearer. So you can see a page from one of his booklets. And it was clear that Jiro Onuma was obsessed with Earl Lederman. He had several platelets of him, portraits of him, although he himself stayed very skinny. So we think that he probably didn't do the exercises. He just wanted to look at people who had done the exercises.
I'm not hearing Tina, TT. Is it any?
I couldn't tell if it was I was frozen or TT was frozen.
I think you're
Yep.
frozen, TT.
Yes. So we'll bring TT back on in the when we do the roundtable. I believe Chris is next. So shall we bring Chris on now?
Yes, and let's see, I've finished the slide. Oh, maybe I'll go back to the slide that's relevant to Chris.
Great. And we'll pin Chris. Great. Hi, Chris.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. My contribution to the book, which I feel so honored to have been included, thank you, E.G., is about this figure, this Mexican revolutionary figure, Emilio Robles Avila. And I wrote a piece kind of meditating, thinking about his biography. He was in a coronel in the Mexican Revolution. He was born in 1889, died lived a long life, lived till 95, died in 1984. Lived as male, though assigned female at birth, and was very adamant about being living and being recognized and acknowledged as male. He was a controversial figure to me. I mean, his masculinity is not one that I feel particularly identified with. The lore around him is that he was womanizing and brave in the war or in the revolution, a machista or misogynist. So like a figure that I have a hard time identifying with myself as queer, feminist, and critical of imperialism, and so not necessarily patriotic. Obviously, we're living in different circumstances. So just, but I used this biography to think about identifying across time, across difference, and how this relationship, at least between me and Emilio, goes one way. So I'm looking at his life and picking and choosing what I feel excited about. And also the politics of identifying across time and space with somebody who would not necessarily have described themselves as trans or I don't know how they described themselves in terms of identity and language. So thinking about all the difficulties of identifying across time, including, identification language, the lack of communication between this figure and I. I also talk about forging these connections and also forging documents, which is not an uncommon practice for many people. I was going to make a generalization about trans people, but I'll just keep it to myself and Amelio. He forged his birth certificate. He or some documents that would allow him to be recognized as a participant in the revolution as male. And I was talking about how my own forging of documents to access trans competent healthcare in the Bay Area. So yeah, this project is really aligned with my other work, with the project that was mentioned in my introduction, the Museum of Trans History and Art, which is absolutely indebted to artists, and specifically E.G. I remember seeing E.G.'s work, the Matchmaking in the Archives project presented, and I remember reaching out to the GLBT Historical Society asking how I could also be a resident. And they were like, that's that's not a thing. That's specific to EG and our relationship, which now I understand. But my own project, Museum of Trans History and Art, it's a forever under construction museum, critical of institutions, museums specifically, but also celebrating trans art and history. And I did an exhibition series in which is called Trans History in 99 Objects, pulling out artwork and archival material connected to an expansively defined trans history, acknowledging all the difficulties of doing a history with contemporary language terms and contemporary conceptions of identity around gender and language around gender. And similar to Matchmaking, the Trans History in 99 Objects books, which came out of a series of exhibitions, which I have a little copy here. You can see me. This is a sample copy. It's not yet out in the world, but it's 99 entries of artworks and archival objects paired with writers or different sorts of writers, scholars, creative work, and engaging with that history. And at the heart of it is a criticality about institutions, and also a position that artists are in a unique and exciting position to engage with history and biographies and in history in a way that acknowledges all the slippery things about history. Or herstory. So herstory is obviously a kind of a take on, or a jumping off point, using the feminist reclamation of herstory, but using a little used gender neutral term here, which I know some people still use, but I remember encountering early in my own journey in the 90s. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you again for the invitation, EG, and thank you again for doing this amazing project that I'm obviously so inspired and indebted to.
Thank you so much, Chris. Now we'll bring on Camille. Camille, you'll need to unmute.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and it's been wonderful to actually hear the processes of the other participants. My relationship with my match, it was unusual because I had met her in passing many years before, when I was finishing graduate school, and I was living in Jamaica Plain outside of Boston. And she was part of an old network of lesbian women in the arts who had known each other for a long, long time. And she was a friend of my partner, Jane Picard, and she stopped by the house. And we really, really hit it off. And we had a lot of in common. Just she was a writer, so was I. She had been involved with the small press publishing world in the 1980s in Berkeley, and that was the world that I was connected to in many ways. And so there was a great bond. She wrote short stories, I wrote poetry. And when E.G. presented me with a couple people to choose from, when I heard her name, I just responded, so surprised. I know her. And I had, it was an honor actually to go to her archive. Her archive was not at the LGBTQ Center. It was at the San Francisco Public Library and the James Hormel Center. And that's a center for queer history. And I am a lover of of special collections in libraries, and I love nothing more than to work and doing research and to reading through people's papers. And so I had that opportunity to do that with Nancy. What I learned is she had this, she was one of the founding members of a journal in the San Francisco Bay Area called Plexus, which paralleled a really incredible journal in Boston called Sojourner, which I, still revere when I think about it. And the Hormel Center did the service of keeping the entire collection of Plexus, all the published issues of that magazine. And so that I think is says something about how people who are not very famous, such as Nancy, can, through their archives, bring incredibly important historical material into libraries. So I read everything. I read all of her letters, and one of the most shocking experiences was I found 2 postcards from myself to Nancy that I had no memory of ever writing. And it was a very intimate and moving experience to just spend time to read the letters that she had written to writers that she admired, who encouraged her or not, sometimes painfully. So my project was, I wrote a poem called Breath. And the poem itself is about one of the parallels that I found between Nancy and myself. She had cystic fibrosis and she died at the age of 59. And I myself had been an incredible smoker and had, quit smoking by the time I was working on this project. So the poem I wrote is called Breath, and it was designed for the exhibit by my friend, the artist Wayne Smith, who ended up designing my second book for me. And I'll just read the beginning of the poem. And in this poem, I'm waiting to figure out how I'm going to write about her. Breath. The poem she wanted was waiting for the next breath. She wanted to push it like a girl on a swing, into the line and out again, into the line, out into switchgrass rippling across the prairie. How long would it wait, she wondered. Would it wait longer than the gas between lightning and thunder? How long would it hold its breath in defiance of her? She decided to make a study of it, of breath that originates in the mind. Not in the mind exactly, but in the breath's beautiful pith, in the long and narrow, starry shadows of the medulla. And so that was my entrance into this experience of being with Nancy as she was breathing, and really knowing that at the end of her life, she had had a double lung transplant, and she had died after that at the age of 59. And it really pleases me, this project with this particular, this was the first grouping went up, I think in 2010, if I'm right about that. And so this is 13 years later, and it is just so moving for me to feel this connection over time, not only with Nancy and with E.G. and everybody here, but also with people who are gone in my life. So anyway, that's what I have to share, what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille. Max is going to pin all of our speakers. And I have a question that I want to pose to everyone, all of the panelists, that everyone sort of addressed somewhat obliquely, and I want to just ask us to push into it a little bit in our brief Q&A here. I want to. You all talked about encounters in the archive that were difficult, that brought up some negative feelings, that were, that you encountered something and it was not as expected. Chris talked about it as in relationship to the sexism of the person, and I'm paraphrasing, you might not use those words, of the person. I was struck as TT was talking about encountering her person who was detained, and how painful that detainment and basically imprisonment was. And so I wanted to ask each of you to reflect. I think it's often easy to talk about what are the life-giving things that we find in archival encounters with people, but I would like you to talk about, what do you do with the challenging things, the things that are more uncomfortable? And because Camille, of course, talked about Nancy's death, and how do we think about that? And I'll stop talking now.
Mm.
I think that, and for a lot of people, that became the focus, that became what generated the art. And the art took many different forms, from letters to movies to sculptural installation, many different forms. But I think, like a couple of people said, I really don't like this person. And that in and of itself generated a relationship that actually shifted over time. I'm thinking of Lauren Crux, who didn't like her match at the beginning, but by the end, she decided she really liked her. So I think that's the material that creates some tension that people can use. I didn't want this to be a sappy project.
I would add that I didn't experience thinking about Nancy's death as a negative. It was really a portal into the work and into my own humanity. So these people are all people who have gone before us, are all teachers in some sense of our own future. But I'll agree with you, E.G., that sitting with that really was the channel I moved through to be able to write the poem that I did.
I feel like I'm not a stranger to dealing with difficult role models, queer role models. I feel like I did a bunch of projects myself, like performative video work, engaging with some difficult role models. And for me, it came from a place of acknowledging that, I don't know, I'm going to speak kind of generally, but that I saw, at least in my world, like a suspicion of older people, older queer people. I feel like and now that I'm an older person, or 45, or older than I was, I can see that there's tensions among queer generations. And, there's like that I wanted to bridge, or I was interested in navigating, because I didn't want to dismiss role models. I feel like there's this way that younger people could be dismissive of older people and vice versa. And I wanted to find a way or to like make these connections that allowed grace and compassion among difference, and despite not perfect fits or perfect identifications, that there could be this shared respect among people across time.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I came across the photographs that were from the incarceration camps, I was actually shocked, given that, I'm fourth generation Japanese American. My grandparents on both sides were incarcerated, and were probably around the same age as Jiro Onuma. And my parents were also in camp. And I have taught queer art history and Asian American art history, but I had never put those two histories together in terms of thinking about Japanese American wartime history. So that was a real revelation for me to just think about that. And in fact, the photographs in Onuma's archive are some of the few known photos of adult queer folks in camp. We of course know folks like George Takei and other folks, but they were like 5 years old when they were incarcerated. So initially I thought, oh, I'm gonna discover all the queer stories, and I wrote an op-ed piece in a Japanese American newspaper, and I thought the stories would come flooding in, and I got no stories. And I got just a tiny bit of hate mail. So that was initially sort of painful and difficult, but then it helped me spend more time with Onuma's archive to kind of dive more deeply into that. And then also to think about the more complex dynamics of same-sex sexuality. So we might think that first-generation immigrants would be more homophobic than American-born Japanese Americans or Asian Americans. But in the context of the camps, the prison camps, people were trying so hard to prove that they were loyal Americans that they actually, in some ways, were more homophobic because they were trying to emulate what they thought were American norms. So it created this interesting reflection that, first generation folks might have had more vibrant queer lives that were actually silenced by their children's generations or the next generation. Someone like Jiro Onuma didn't have kids, but so those are the kinds of complexities that I found interesting and generative. And as E.G. said, it was the stuff that moves the project forward. The complexity was what drove the project and continues to drive my work.
Thank you all so much. I have the unfortunate task of saying we are near the top of the hour. This has been so fantastic to hear about your work, to share about this book. I thank you all on behalf of our audience and the entire Sinister Wisdom community for joining us this evening. Our tradition is to do a dance number at this point. The song is the L Word. Max has it queued up. We'll highlight people dancing at their desk, and when the song ends, the Zoom call will end. I do invite you to join us in 2 weeks for our conversation with Judy Grahn about her new reissue, The Highest Apple. Thank you all. Dance away.
Everybody Violence against lesbians and gays has increased every year since the start of the AIDS crisis. We still fear losing our jobs. We are denied places to live. We are here today to say enough is enough. We are ready to live as full and equal members of society, and we are ready to fight for our freedom. So give me an L, give me an E, give me an S, give me a B, give me an I, A, and everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. This is a significant time in our community and our visibility as a movement. We must be strong and proud and out. The next time you say the L word, think of the woman next to you, or your teammate on the soccer field, or the wise one that's helping you through. Think of your high school basketball coach, or your last music festival crush, or your ultimate erotic fantasy. It's okay to blush. Find a mirror, look yourself in the eye, and with warm regard, say the L word, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Have your mama say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Word to your lover.
Thank you all so much. We'll see you in 2 weeks.